Adam, thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of Trust Talk. To kick us off, you've had an extraordinary career across academia, consultancy, corporate leadership. What first drew you into waste policy and public engagement?
Oof, goes back many years, but thanks for the invitation, Bilal. I think litter duty at school, I was a little bit on the edge, a little bit naughty at times, so stayed behind, clearing up the litter at school. Got me fascinated by what litter was. Then I read the Wombles books by Elizabeth Beresford and became hooked on cleaning up the planet. And I guess it was inevitable that I went to university and studied geography, ended up working for a waste management authority, looking after public behaviour and recycling. And the policy bit became the PhD. I answered the exam question about why we weren't raising recycling rates faster. And now I work in policy for a living, a bit of behaviour engagement, a bit of customer relationship. But it all stems from years of litter picking.
So we have EPR, DRS, waste collection. You know, for the average person, it can be all confusing. Could you explain some of the changes that are happening right now?
Yeah, there's a lot going on. It's a lot of acronyms, which I think can put, even an industry expert off. So let's break it down. You've got simpler recycling, which means every household and every business will have the same materials collected wherever they are and whatever they do. Paper, cardboard, plastics, glass, food waste. So it doesn't matter if you're on the go, at work or at home, the same materials over the next 12 months will all be available to be collected. EPR, extended producer responsibility, means brands that put packaging on the market that need to be captured and recycled have to pay for the privilege of doing so. So there'll be an element of money coming into the local authority system to pay for more of that material to be captured. So that's the polluter pays principle. And then DRS, deposit return scheme, this is something that people from the 70s and 80s will remember, where you had the Corona bottles and you used to get 10p back if you took them back to the newsagent. We're going to be doing that for a lot of target packaging materials. And the idea is that you're incentivised to keep that material clean, take it back to the shop, and therefore that material goes round and round in a circular economy. So all of these measures are about trying to make recycling easier and also to pay for it in the right way. Those that produce it, pay for it.
And you've been at the heart of consultations with governments. What's the hardest part of turning policy ambition into practical actions?
Well, my PhD was about policy implementation failure. And I guess 30 years later, I'm still going, why is it we haven't implemented some of these reforms that 8 years ago I was sat in the Secretary of State's office with the launch of the Recycling and Waste Management Strategy for the UK, or for England in particular. And then you realise that 7 or 8 years later, we still haven't made most of those policies live.
No.
And I think lobby groups, different stakeholder positions, unintended consequences that you start to come to life as you work through implementation issues. And there's a lot of vested interests where it might work for some, but it doesn't work for others. So what you realise is that policy is ideal and implementation is kind of like that middle ground. It's trying to find the thing that works for most.
Yeah.
And that means you've got to horse trade a little bit about, what you ideally get and what you can actually get. And that's politics all over, though.
And do you think here in the UK we're moving fast enough, or we losing momentum?
I can't think we're moving fast enough if it's 8 years and we've still got most of the strategy to be implemented. I think the current government, let's be honest, Labour have decided to really ramp up the agenda. So I think the Circular Economy Task Force is proving that you can work quickly on answering difficult questions. Whether they can implement fast enough remains to be seen. And you've only got to look at what's happening in Korea or in France. You can see that they're moving much faster on some of these agenda items. So I'm hoping we can learn from other places and go, we don't need to talk as much as we do. We've got to get on with delivery.
And if you were to be blunt, would you say that politicians are brave enough to deliver policies around circularity?
I think politicians are brave going into politics, to be honest with you. But whether they're brave enough on environmental policies, I don't think they are, because I think the big agenda items in the UK right now are economics. There are jobs, the job security, and it's economic growth. And I think any politician that comes out strong on green or environmental agendas has to set it in the context that, is that going to be a vote winner because I'm only here for 4 or 5 years? If you can't balance environmental agendas with economic growth, it's very difficult, I think, to set a long-term political mandate. So are politicians brave enough? Maybe not, but I understand why they're not.
Kind of moving on from there to talking about changing behaviour at scale, you're well known for pioneering work on public attitudes to waste. Looking back, what actual shifts behaviour, education, incentives or kind of regulation from your perspective?
I always talk about my mum. My mum's my benchmark. She might have a doctor of waste for a son. Yeah. Her husband worked in waste management for 25 years, but she's kind of my average person. So has she changed her behaviour in the last 30 years? Yes. She recycles most weeks. Yeah. She recycles most materials and she gets it right most of the time. So I think educationally we've done a reasonable job. I think the service provision is very good now across the UK, but what we aren't doing is necessarily tapping into the next generation and the generation beyond that. Do they know why we're doing it? Do they know how to do it? And do they know how to engage properly? And I think we have to keep reinforcing the message. So without strong regulation, good behaviour and good education can only take you so far. And I think what's been missing over the last decade has been the enforcement around bad behaviour or those that contaminate or those that are making packaging materials that aren't ready to be recycled. So I think you've got to have the mix of engagement, education and enforcement to ensure that we can drive change that we want to see. At
the moment, we've seen kind of recycling rates plateau across certain parts of the UK. Do you think we've hit the limit of behaviour change?
No, not at all. I think, 44, 45%. We've been there for 9 decades. It flexes slightly, but the reality is that's as good as it gets in England based on service provision. Yeah. But if you look at Wales has got nearly 70% recycling rate. Why? They've got a slightly more comprehensive system, they've got a better funded system, and they've got a better educational and promotional campaign around it. Now, the Welsh have got an easier setting, less local authorities, less people, so I understand all that. Yeah. But I think that's the benchmark. We should be aiming for 70%. But that means targeting high-rise. It means targeting some of the poorer economic groups who currently aren't doing it as well as we know they could. And I think it's also about building a service, which is what simpler recycling is about, that everybody has access to. And I think EPR will fund that change and simpler recycling will enable that change. So I'm hoping some of the people that do it badly some of the time will become regular good recyclers in the near future.
And from your perspective, what role does trust play in this? A lot of people still think that, it all gets recycled anyway. How do you really rebuild confidence in the general public that, to take recycling seriously?
Well, I think the general public don't trust a lot of people. So the politicians we're not listening to. Local government, I'm not sure they listen to them anymore. Yeah. A doctor of waste management, am I credible? Maybe more credible than some. But I work for a waste management company. Well, you make money from this, so yeah. I'm less credible. So they turn to the green groups, they turn to the campaigners, and I think that's good that they're listening to somebody. But in reality, I think there's an inherent desire to want to do more for most people. Yeah. We need to make it easier for them. But equally, I think we've had years of letting them down. Stuff that's been put out for recycling not being recycled. We see our recycling in Turkey, in Vietnam. That's not building trust, that's eroding trust. So I think we've got a long way to go before the average person on the high street in the UK absolutely gets it right and believes that the system will deliver. So I think we've all got to step our game up.
Absolutely. And moving on from there, you're one of the most visible leaders across social media, trade journals, and even at conference stages. How important is communication in sustainability leadership?
I'd say it's the most important. Because I think you can get the technical. There's lots of people that are very technically credible when it comes to decarbonisation or biodiversity or setting strategic targets that are about the environment. But if you can't communicate it, if you can't empower, if you can't infuse, then you're not going to bring your workforce with you. So SUEZ, we've got 7,500 people. We need to communicate to frontline staff about how their little steps of improvement make a huge impact. But equally, I need to be able to explain to the business leaders that they need to get on board with the big shifts that we're proposing, because otherwise there's a disconnect between frontline and the business. So it's all about communication in my eyes. And I think I look at great communicators, David Attenborough's in this world, or Chris Packham's, and I'm like, they're technically very sound, but you don't listen to them technically. You listen to them because they're absolutely brilliant at communicating the issue. And that's about understanding the audience.
As CIWM president, you led during a time of intense change. What did you learn about influencing not just policymakers, but industry peers as well?
I think we've always been an industry of competition, and therefore what you want to share, and CIWM's role as a professional body within the waste and resources sector is about looking at best practice and looking about the vision, a world without waste or a sustainable future, and going, how can this best practice be rolled out across other businesses or other sectors, and how can we enable and facilitate joint working between private and public, or the charity, third sector, the NGOs. And I think the CIWM is perfectly placed to enable that. And certainly in my time, we were talking green skills a lot. We were talking about preparing for a world of low carbon. And actually, you can't do that without private and public, regulator and government, NGOs and my mum, all understanding that they've got a role to play, and we have to talk a similar language, and we have to walk the walk. There's no point having a great strapline if you look at our evidence and it's less than compelling.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do we make the waste sector's voice much louder in wider sustainability and climate conversations?
By not using the waste word. So I don't talk about green skills or waste sector. I talk about resources. I talk about critical skills. You want to talk about the circular economy. I don't think that lands very well at the moment with the general public. So let's talk about the economy, but let's talk about resource efficiency. Let's talk about one planet living. Let's talk about a society that is going to be there for your children's children without them having to make huge sacrifices. Yeah. And I think that's compelling. You talk about jobs. If I can get people to, to see that there are job opportunities in the circular economy, they don't need to know it's the circular economy. They just need to know it's good jobs that are going to help protect the environment and look after their family. Good jobs, irrelevant of the brand. So I think the narrative is important. At the moment, I don't think the waste narrative is a good one. The circular economy one's difficult. And I think anybody that talks about green at the moment, politically, isn't going anywhere. So you've got to change the dialogue a little bit to make it more appealing to the audiences that you're trying to influence. At the moment, Labour are about economic growth, Reform Party, economic growth. Yeah. That's the language that we're using.
And looking ahead, you've worked globally, Russia, India, Africa. What international lessons should the UK take on board when it comes to, resource management?
I was very lucky early in my career that I travelled the world doing waste management strategies and pilot programs in all sorts of crazy locations. And what I learned in every case was committed people change systems. No. And so by having NGOs working alongside the mayors of cities, you could create an environment that could go beyond the economic or the political landscape and go, we can be better because we're all committed to doing a better job. And I think sometimes I bring that back to the UK and I go, why is it that reuse and repair is still really prevalent in Eastern Europe? And that's because the economics are different, but it's also because they've got economies that are based on the value of materials. We've lost that. We've become an economy about buying stuff. They've got an economy that's about keeping stuff. Yeah, every time I've come back from somewhere and gone, what did I learn? I go, I've learned that people make a huge difference. Yeah. And I think my job is to enable people to make the difference that they want to make.
From your perspective, what are some of the hard truths you think the sector doesn't talk about enough, whether it's consumption, waste exports, or even policies?
I think waste exports is an interesting one because it's a requirement of a system in transition. You can't build the UK remanufacturing base fast enough to keep pace with what we're trying to do on the collection side. Yeah. So you've got to accept that over time there's going to be movement of materials so that the system flows. And also, we live in a global economy. So I've never been worried about exporting material. I'm worried about exporting waste and low-grade material. That shouldn't be accepted. I think the big elephant in the room is consumption. No government in UK history since the war has ever talked about consumption. And yet that is the root of all of our problems. We consume 3 times the resources that we're entitled to. At some point, they run out. The economics of that system will crash. So linear isn't the answer, circular is, but that's not something my mum understands. So I don't want to talk about let's move from linear to circular. I want to talk about resources that are kept alive for longer, products that are repairable and or goods that can be remanufactured. And I think dealing with consumption is something UK government has to get its head round quickly before we spiral out of control on the linear economy.
Let's fast forward to 2060. Paint a picture for me. What would waste management look like?
Well, I'll be feet up on a beach, watching from afar, an online journal telling me how good UK and European best practice. I think if you go to 2040, there'll be much higher resource efficiency, there'll be much more circularity. It won't just be recycling. We will have a repair and reuse culture that's embedded in schools, at home, in work. And we'll also have a range of novel technologies that are taking whatever's residual, because there'll still be things like nappies, I'm sure, and they'll be turning that into much better product use, not just energy generation, but material generation, taking it back to the elements, if you like, on the chemistry set, and going, that's a feedstock for manufacturing, or that's a feedstock for the chemical sector. And I think understanding how resource management sits in the transition of all of these other sectors is actually the success. If we can map that, then we can produce outputs that every sector wants and needs, then we become a critical friend and a critical part of a huge transition, which is the UK. So if the UK becomes low carbon, resource efficient, more circular by default, we've become the resource managers embedded in the car sector or the chemical sector. You don't talk about the waste sector in 2050, 2060. We won't exist, because we would have done a really good job of becoming resource managers.
I've got a quick fire round. Is the government serious about circular economy, yes or no?
Yes.
Who's more to blame for slow progress, politicians or corporations?
Politicians, just.
Is waste to energy part of the solution or just a necessary evil?
Part of the solution is a transition technology.
Would you rather see a new incinerator or a new landfill built in the UK?
I'd rather see an incinerator with heat offtake and carbon capture.
Biggest bit of greenwash in the waste sector right now?
We can recycle anything.
Harder to influence, government ministers or general public?
Government ministers.
I had a feeling you'd say that.
Good question.
If you could scrap one waste policy, what would it be?
End of life, because that stops so many things having a secondary life because they're considered waste. And then you need to do an awful lot to undo the waste tag.
Is circular economy really scalable or just a nice theory?
Circular economy is scalable, but it won't be circular. It will be elliptical, and it'll be lots of circles and lots of loops, but not one circular economy.
Adam, thank you so much for that.
Pleasure.
Appreciate your time. It's a great discussion.
Thank you.